All right, looks like I am live once again. And in this live stream, as the title implies, I'm going to be talking about the art and science of listening, what it means, and really in a more large scale, discuss how it relates specifically to mental illness and how our ability to listen or not is actually uh, our ability to listen really determines possibly where we land on that spectrum, let's say. And that might sound like a crazy, outlandish, or harsh, mean thing to say. But if we understand that basically every single uh, spiritual tradition, whether it's Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and their permutations, they all basically start from the basis that human beings are from this very kind of decrepit state. And there are ways to move out of that. So, if we are people who are interested in spirituality or self help or personal development, in my opinion and my experience, and also what these traditions have said, this is sort of really how we even step foot or put our foot in, dip our toes in the water or step our foot through even the door. So basically, enough waffling aside, listening is something that I believe and I have experienced that can profoundly enrich and deepen our life experience. Now, I say this and I want to drive this point home because oftentimes people will remark on my content and say, oh, it's negative, it's harsh, it's a buzzkill, it's a downer. And the thing is, I don't think it is actually. I mean, we can agree to disagree. And the reason why I'm able to comfortably have these types of uncomfortable conversations or subjects or topics is because it's based upon some ability to actually listen, which actually leads to a rich life experience, meaning uh, an ability to deeply connect to art of all shapes and sizes and forms, whether that's uh, tea or incense or music or movies or things of that capacity, an ability to, connect with nature and have a sense of fulfillment from that, to obviously really enjoy sensory things like food or environments and have an enriched and fulfilling sensory experience, and also more deeply connect with people. So it would be basically a straw man to assume that if I point out something that says, "Oh, well, here's where people go wrong," or "Here's a stumbling point," or "Here's a blockage," or "Here's something that is inefficient," people will straw man and assume that that applies to every single life experience, and then somehow twist that into that must mean I'm some type of distorted, weird character, which oddly and ironically enough is exactly the mechanisms that I'm talking about here, and also partially how I arrived at some of these understandings is through actual real world experience and reflection on genuine, real interactions with people. So, going back to the point, listening can deeply enrich our lives across a multitude of contexts and endeavors. What does that actually mean? Well, it's maybe the skill, or I would say possibly the quality of actually being able to focus on something, to understand and process something. And in this context, we'll say another person. So to be able to actually focus, understand, and process what another person is saying. And now I want to be clear that I'm not talking about active listening or nonviolent communication or any of these other derivative, insane, mentally ill things that people do, because fundamentally that's all it is. Like, if you have to, okay, now I'm listening. Yes, you're faking. You're not actually listening. Like, if I'm, just to use a really crass example, if I'm emptying my bowels or my bladder, then I'm actually doing that. I don't have to do any, I'm doing active bladder emptying. Okay, now I'm emptying my bladder and I'm no, it's an actual tangible thing that is either occurring or it isn't. It's really as simple as that. So I just want to say that's not what I'm talking about. And it involves actually more than just hearing words. It requires a person to actually be able to set aside their own thoughts, judgments, and reactions temporarily to actually cultivate what we might define as attention. And actually means that we, from that standpoint, from that basis, would actually have the possibility to engage with someone with some degree of empathy. Because if we're not actually able to listen, hear, and understand, then empathy and compassion, all those things are just out. They're out the door. They're just not possible. So then what's left is some sort of fake representation or some sort of compensation, usually some sort of virtue signaling that's more about that person feeling good about themselves or showing how they're morally uh, superior rather than actual genuine empathy or whatever. And the real problem with a lot of this stuff is that as time progresses, the genuine examples of the things that I'm discussing are becoming more uncommon and they're becoming more difficult for people to even access. So then, what people are being more likely to reference and orientate around are false, fake examples of that, which is not a good thing and not leading people in a positive direction, and also strongly and profoundly undermining their health. So, effective listening would be actually having some nonverbal attunement to what someone is saying. And actually, if we don't understand something or we don't make sense of something, being able to actually reflect and clarify. And then actually having some degree of maturity, let's say, or patience to able to actually allow people to express themselves without having to just constantly um, interrupt. And then basically on down that chain of causation, we would be able to actually have empathy, meaning trying to not only understand the words, but actually the feeling qualities and the emotional experiences behind that. So in a simple thing, we could understand and hear what someone is saying, but then also why they're saying it, what led them to say that, what motivated them and got them to that position. So that would give a person a listener a much wider context, a much wider um, scope of understanding than just the absence of such. And I will say I feel completely retarded and ridiculous having to break these things down and to say these things and have these conversations. But I can tell you that one of the reasons why I'm doing it is because in a dating context, for example, I would say the number one thing that I've brought up with many different women that I'd been possibly interested in dating or met them within that context comes down to exactly this. And I can tell you, I've had a fair amount of conversations with people that I didn't connect with or it didn't work, where I would say, yeah, why I am not able to be attracted to you or be physically or sexually open or want to move things forward is because I don't feel this listening quality is there. And then maybe they're interested in me, maybe they have connect, maybe they have retraction, maybe they want to pursue things. And then I will say, here's clear examples of an absence of listening. And then usually that's met with like a straw man, a red herring, or an ad hominem, or like, oh, that's just your opinion, or basically some variation on retreating to subjectivity or relativity with the intention of undermining or invalidating what I'm saying and shifting it over again back to whatever distraction or diversion they're trying to get to. Which, of course, obviously, I mean, I'm a human being. I'm relating to the world via my nervous system, my sense of self. Duh. However, the issue becomes when there's clear examples that occurred in the objective real world that maybe anyone could look at, or maybe if there was a third party that had a camera or something, and then we could go back and play the tape. This actually literally occurred in the real world. It's not just a subjective feeling. It's not just a, a product of intense rumination and delusion. No, it's something that actually occurred. Or on a more tangible example, maybe it's a text thread or an email thread, and you can point to clear, exact examples of lack of listening. And then when you mention lack of listening, then it becomes red herring, straw man, ad hominem, subjectivity, relativity, or just becomes like a personal emotional attack. And it's again not listening. So that's some of the motivation, or I would say maybe one pillar of why I'm saying this. There's also the whole relation within internal arts, whether it's Tai Chi or Neigong or whatever, the ability to actually listen and the ability to have actual attention is really the currency in those things. If it's the same thing with meditation, and I think it's really a similar thing with actually being a somewhat mentally well human being, because like I said from the beginning, if we took the inability to listen to the extreme, that would be someone that's very mentally unwell. And I think how this relates on a large scale is that more and more people are not able to listen. So more and more people are becoming mentally unwell. So what people tend to do instead of listening is they filter for whether they agree or disagree, which means does it fit into their pre-existing ideology, which means does it make them feel good or bad? And then usually based from those three things, they just sort of are waiting for their moment to talk. And I can tell you, as far back as I can remember, even being a child, I can remember specifically and clearly being very attuned to this, to attuned that this person's not listening. They have, it doesn't matter. I could, like, I could like clap, I could do a chicken dance instead of what I'm saying, and the reaction will be the same. I could just belch really loud and the reaction would be the same. I could start scratching my armpits and acting like a monkey and the reaction would be the same because they're not even fucking listening. And I remember one time when I was maybe a teenager or a little kid, and maybe I was in some argument with my mom or something. And I remember instead of talking, I just started making noises. And like and exactly the outcome was the same because there was no listening. It didn't really matter what I said because I could tell the person was just either agree or disagree, meaning does this make me feel good or bad, or does this fit into my pre-existing ideology or some other form of what I would call mental illness, mental unwellness, let's say. And I can tell you after making, I don't know, 900 videos on YouTube over the course of 12 years or however long it's been, I've seen the same exact thing in a lot of the comments, both positive and negative. And that's also why I just kind of quit caring about comments and engaging for a lot of the things. I mean, I can tell obviously if someone's genuine and it's a real person, an actual thoughtful thing, then yeah, I'll engage with it. But if it's not, then whatever. But I realized that whether people were agreeing or disagreeing, when I actually dug into it and either engaged with them or just read what they were saying, it was clear that they weren't actually responding to anything that I said. And I can tell you more times than not, in instances within a dating context where I've had conflict or misunderstanding with women, I would say eight times out of 10, they're talking about things that didn't occur, that didn't actually happen in the real world, things I didn't actually say, I didn't actually do. And then that becomes very bothersome and very confusing because that's to me mental illness. Because if you think about it on the extreme, people that are schizophrenic or have really developed narcissistic personality disorder, they like almost exclusively exist in their own subjective um, thoughts and feelings and believe them entirely. And that's a well established psychological fact. And what I'm trying to get at in a roundabout way is that society and culture is really pushing people more towards those things. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going that direction already. I could get into why exactly that's occurring, but I don't really want to because that would be even more offensive and really get into murky waters. And I'll say it is affecting certain demographics more than others. And then that is becoming a tidal wave and a snowball rolling downhill that's having a lot of negative consequences. So again, you can say I'm mean or negative or I'm an asshole for mentioning these things or pointing things out, or maybe it's the fact that I maybe would prefer people to not do those things. And to me, it's helpful to maybe bring awareness to things that don't help people so that maybe they could do something different and then maybe have a better life. But yeah, I get it. I'm the asshole. You're right. Okay. So, in a total inability to listen or connect with anything in the external world, thus fully believing every thought, feeling, and sensation would basically be mental illness, which we could ask ourselves this: if a person, as their only response mechanism, is retreating to subjectivity and relativity, what would that imply? If subjectivity and relativity are their only form of engagement and they do that through logical fallacies, let's compare that with the definition that I just read. Total inability to listen or connect with something in the outside world, thus fully consumed with their internal world, fully believing every thought, feeling, and sensation. Hmm. So, if someone's entirely cut off from external output and unable to consider perspectives beyond their own thoughts and feelings, it can basically lead to a self reinforcing loop of their own fears and distortions, which ultimately goes to trending towards mental health disorders like delusions, isolation, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder. And in the extreme state, a person loses their ability to reality check their experience or gain feedback from the outside world, that leads to pretty distorted perceptions that, in essence, become self validating because they're not checking in with the external world anymore, which is more or less a form of psychosis. Because they're fully believe their delusional ideas because they cannot listen to or absorb outside evidence or alternative viewpoints. Similarly, narcissistic tendencies tend to grow out of a deep seated inability to empathize or engage with others' perspectives. Hmm. So, listening actually serves as a tether to the collective reality or the outside world or just other people because it's kind of a check and balance on our own internal world. Without that, a person just ends up trapped in an echo chamber of their own mind. Hmm. So, based on that definition, what would that mean or imply, and how would that connect to someone whose really default mechanistic responses are subjectivity and relativity? Might there be a connection there? Hmm, I wonder. And the fact that on a large scale, more and more people are trending towards those directions, might that be a good or a bad thing? Hmm. So, based on those definitions, what would be the opposite? What would be a different direction? The ability to listen, the ability to actually start to observe and engage with the external world. Meaning, to use the example that I was saying earlier, if I'm talking to a female in a dating context and I'm referring to 5 things that literally occurred in the real world, meaning if you had a camera, you could see them. If I say, I mentioned these 3 concerns, and her response was to completely change the subject to something completely unrelated as if I had never actually said those things, and then go on some completely unrelated tangent. So if I say that is what occurred, and if we had a camera and we filmed it, the camera would say, "Yeah, that's what occurred." But then if they come back and say, "Oh, well, that's just your opinion, that's just your feeling, that's just your subjective experience," or "You're an asshole," or "You're mean," or "You're harsh," or some ad hominem attack, or they distort it into a straw man or a red herring. Hmm. How does that relate to the definitions and the well established psychological principles of mental illness that I just described? Hmm. Same thing on YouTube. I make a video about a subject. I say very hopefully clear assertions that are very obviously just my opinion and my experience. And a person's default response is ad hominem, red herring, straw man, subjectivity, relativity. Hmm. What is that? I don't know. What would that imply about that person? It's very interesting. So I'll end this and I'll go back to a bit more of a positive note, because the reason why I say these things, the reason why I point these things out is not because it's enjoyable or it's fun. It's actually not. Is because I actually would prefer to be able to connect and communicate with people. I I would my belief and my desire for my personal life is to have it be enjoyable and be an enriched experience, regardless of whatever it is I'm doing. Right? I would have thought that's kind of what everyone has a baseline of life, especially people that are like, "Oh, life's a gift. You never know when it's going to end," or "It's a blessing to be here." All these types of cliches, right? Okay, exactly. I mean, I agree. So then, wouldn't you want to not be unwell? Wouldn't you want to maximize that experience? Wouldn't you want to, I don't know, have it be rich, have be able to connect with the food you eat and enjoy it, even if it's plain basic food, be able to actually have it be a very enriching sensory experience. And I'll tell you, I'll say these things, and then let's say I'll meet someone or I'll have a friend or I'll go on a date and they want to be on their phone while they're eating. And then I say, "Hey, maybe we should just maybe not be on our phones while we're eating." "You're such an asshole. Oh my God, you're so rigid. You're so uptight. What's wrong with you?" I was like, "Wait, but like 10 minutes ago, you're telling me about how spiritual we are and how life's a gift and it's a blessing and that life is this amazing interconnected web and all these things. But when it comes to actually doing something, then now all of a sudden I'm mean for trying to actually do the thing." Um, and I could sit here all day and go through examples, but I won't. But basically, why I'm saying this is this: listening leads to hearing, hearing leads to understanding, understanding can lead to connection, connection can lead to intimacy, intimacy can lead to love. And to me, that's why it's so important. To me, that's why if I meet a female in a dating context and I don't feel that they're able to actually listen, because they aren't, because there's a clear visceral quality that occurs. There's a clear chemistry that occurs between people. Call that connection, call that intimacy, so many different things you could call that, but it's a thing. It's a real thing that is not necessarily up to our control, because that is the very nature and the definition of love and connection and intimacy. If it was something we could just control and have it on demand, it would lose its appeal to us very likely. The fact that there's an element that is uncontrollable and unexplainable and not within our full grasp is probably what makes it so appealing. Because if you look at things that are genuinely really engaging and appealing to humans on a large scale, they usually have some element of those things. And if you look at what is boring to people, well, boring is just you completely understand it. It's completely predictable. It's completely just so okay. So that's my basis. So when people make straw man or ad hominem attacks or accuse me of being so angry and mean, or just basically say really ignorant, low IQ things that demonstrate they can't listen, I laugh, because my basis is, like I said, I'd prefer to have an enriching, enjoyable life experience. And it seems pretty clear to me that listening and hearing and understanding are interrelated with connection and intimacy and love, as is empathy, and those things are all wound up in there. So if I'm meeting someone within the context to hopefully get to intimacy, and then they can't do the things that come before it, and then I say, "Hey, these things are absent, they're not here," and then they come out with, "Oh, ad hominem, subjectivity, relativity, personal attacks. It's like, okay, well, thanks for confirming what I just said. Like, cool. uh, so whether we're dealing with relationships or whatever, I'll just say this to you: because people's inability to not listen, ultimately their worldview and their life experience gets smaller and smaller and less fulfilling and actually much more predictable. They become much more easily to control, manipulate, coerce. They become much more emotionally reactive. And what do you think that leads to? Depression, anxiety, feeling down, feeling unfulfilled. And then that makes people very profitable. When in actuality, it comes down to a very simple mechanism. So going back to the point of listening, hearing, understanding, empathy, connection, intimacy, love, if those things are absent and people are relating or they're in a relationship, whether it's friendly or romantic, then it's obvious and clear and implicit that they're operating under very different mechanisms, which I can tell you I've opened that door. I've peered behind that curtain and it's not pretty. And I actually was working on well, I guess I still am working on a book actually explaining what it is people are actually doing when those things are absent. And I've actually made videos over the last couple of years talking about that. And again, people think, oh, he's mean. Ugh. Actually, no, it's because my basis and my goal is those positive things. And then when they're absent, I say, well, what is there instead? Oh, what's there instead? Maybe I'll make videos. Maybe I'll try to explain it. Maybe I'll try to understand why it occurs, what leads people to those things. And then maybe people can make a different choice or do something else or have awareness. To me, that seems kind of useful, helpful, dare I say, nice. But yeah. So how this relates is that in a way we could say that these concepts are a natural progression, each building on the last one to basically deepen and enrich a relationship. So hearing is obviously just being able to receive communication, hear the words, but they might not actually go deeper. We might not actually understand them or have them genuinely penetrate. Let's use that word. Listening goes beyond hearing because it's actually a fairly deliberate sort of quality that maybe it's deliberate if you don't have it, but then once you have it, it's pretty passive. And I think for people, it should be passive. I think if you have to actively do it, then you're not doing it. Um, and it requires, some degree of attention, like I said before, some degree of openness, like I said before, and then some degree of being able to at least temporarily suspend our own agendas. And then understanding develops from hearing and listening, because if you actually listen and we can actually hear, then we actually might have the possibility to grasp not just the literal message, but the actual underlying emotions, intentions, and perspectives of the other person or the object that we're listening to, which then can open the door for a degree of comprehension that can facilitate empathy and insight. And from there, then we can open the door for connection because an understanding can be mutual, because you can listen, hear, and understand what the other person is saying in a way that's beyond words, because maybe it leads to empathy and insight. And then that can actually open the door to some degree of, let's say, insight or some degree of actual connection and mutuality, because they might feel understood and you understand them, and it can create some kind of bond. But more importantly, it actually can create trust, because it's like, oh, this person actually sees who I am. They hear where I'm coming from. Okay, maybe I can actually trust them. And then that becomes a back and a forth I would have thought that would have been the point of even doing it in the first place. But I guess I'm a retard for thinking that that's should have been the point. Um, so yeah, hearing, listening, understanding, connection, and then from there, intimacy, because that connection can deepen. And then from the trust that's developed, people can be more and more vulnerable because they feel safe and heard to actually be themselves. They feel seen and heard for who they actually are. So they feel more comfortable to do more of that. And then maybe the defensiveness can go down. The natural hostility that some people carry can maybe go down. And then actually can form a bit of a respite from the world. And it can form an actual nourishing, energizing, enlivening connection and experience. And it actually can open the door for emotional closeness to grow, which can then deepen a bond and deepen connection and can open the door for actual acceptance and compassion from both people. And then the last thing would be from each of these chains of progression, then love could be a possibility where people have sustained emotion or they've sustained intimacy and they've sustained connection over a long enough period of time, and they actually listen and understand and have empathy for the other person. So then I would have thought that was the point. Like I thought that's what we're supposed to get to. But if people meet and they're in a romantic context and they can't even listen and they don't listen, they're not willing to listen, then everything else is not even possible. And if those things are not possible, then you have to then ask, well, then what are they doing? And the thing is, go watch go watch Love is Blind season 7 as a great example, or any of the Love is Blinds, and you can see people caught up in doing the opposite of everything that I'm talking about. And if you want to start peering into what people are actually doing and what people are really like, this heuristic in this mode of contrast is actually quite useful. Uh, assuming you can actually listen and you're not just reacting to your own whatever. So in essence, each of these steps is part of a continuum where one naturally leads to the next, which naturally enriches the relationship as each one deepens. And at the core, it can be a deeply engaging and emotionally fulfilling connection through the process of being able to actually listen to the other person. So, therefore, in closing, that's why it is wildly hilarious that I would be perceived as an asshole because I'm trying to stand by these principles and these well established mechanisms, these well established concepts that are objectively true now and will be objectively true tomorrow and were objectively true yesterday, regardless of my opinion or my feeling or your feeling or anyone's feeling about it. It's just true and it has been true. But I'm an asshole for for trying to say that, or for being bothered when people are not engaging in those things. Because that honestly, that's really one of the only things that I find offensive or bothersome. I mean, aside from the obvious things of people being just hurtful and mean and genuinely negative, it's really just comes down to these listening mechanics. And I can tell you, at least from my personal subjective relative experience, people become very transparent and very crystal clear at a certain point. And again, I know that's how could he say that? That's insane. What an asshole. He's arrogant. He thinks he's better than everyone else. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Blah blah blah. No, those are just straw man ad hominem, like low IQ defense mechanisms. That's not what I'm saying. That's just a distortion of what I'm saying based on probably not in any ability to listen, because Another just stupid thing I have to point out is that, yeah, we're all human and none of us are 100% right 100% of the time. So, on that subject, maybe I'll just discuss another thing that I think people that are not very intelligent do, and that I see people that I actually consider intelligent are not doing. So, if I say it's raining outside or the sun is shining outside, there's a certain percentage of people that will say, "Well, it's not raining here. It's not sunny here. You think you're better than me because you're saying this." And that's just an example. I could fill in the blank with so many other different things, right? So what people end up doing in that is they think some type of abstract exception sort of disproves the whole thing, right? Like I've talked about this in another live stream where I was trying to get across this idea of, again, objective real world, people being orientated. Basically, I was just trying to argue for people to be less mentally unwell, is ultimately what it was come down to. And I was using the example of people building a house and how great it is that we've all agreed upon this is like these are the measurements. This is an inch, this is a 2x4, this is a nail, this is a screw, this is a hammer. Da, 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 da. We've defined all of these things. But then people were like, yeah, but what's an inch to an ant? What's an inch to a bumblebee? Who cares? Like, boom. Like, gotcha. And I'm just thinking, I don't know what's more disturbing, that a person would be that dumb to think that that's like a genuine thing to say, or they think I'm so dumb that I'm going to hear that and be like, shucks, my whole worldview just collapsed because an inch to an ant is not an inch, and an inch is just a human construct. It's like, yeah, obviously it's a human construct. It's an amazing thing that we came up with. I'll give you a great example of this. I may have shared this before, but I had a friend of a friend, and this guy swore at one point he swore off shoes. He said they were foot prisons, we weren't built for this. And it was a wider statement and protest for the downfalls of progress and human industrialization and how horrible humans are for the planet. And his sign of protest was to swear off foot prisons. And granted, this guy lived in Chicago, downtown. So fast forward the story, 2 weeks later, his feet are destroyed, as you can imagine, from not wearing foot prisons in downtown Chicago. And he had the profound realization one day where he said, man, it would be amazing if someone could come up with something that I could put on my foot that would like protect my feet from the concrete and from the harsh reality of my foot being bare. And my friend was like, "Oh, you mean shoes?" He was like, "No, dude, not shoes, not foot prisons. Just something that's like could cover my feet and be protective, but also maybe like kind of springy and soft." And my friend's like, "Yeah, shoes." No, 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 you're not hearing me. You don't understand. It's just I'm not about foot prisons. It's just my feet are bare and they're getting destroyed by the environment. And I just need something to protect it. Maybe I could get like a piece of leather or something and like tie it on my foot with a string, something like that. My friend's like, yeah, shoes. It's like, oh God, you're just too conditioned, bro. The Matrix has you. The industrial complex has you. You're just so conditioned by the capitalistic blah 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 worldview. You just can't think outside the box. I'm trying to break free of foot prisons. And my friend's like, no, you're just talking about shoes, man. He's like, oh God. It just had him like stormed out of the room. So that's a real story. That's a real person. That actually occurred. And the fact of the matter is, we can laugh at that person, but I'm telling you, that degree of logic and that high propensity of fallacy and muddled confusion is how a lot of people exist, where they find these weird exceptions to things and they think that it disproves everything, or they fixate on really fringe examples and think that because there's 99.9999% it's true, but I found this 0.01% where it's not true. So that means the 99.9999 is wrong, and we should change everything in the world to focus and make that 0.00001% right. And that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life, genuinely. And if that comes across as mean, that's fine. I'm it it is genuinely idiotic and stupid and moronic and fill in the blank of pejorative. It's so dumb. But I'm telling you, this is how a lot of people think. This is how when they experience conflict in their world, when they hear opinions that are different, their brain just goes in these odd directions. And this profoundly and intimately goes back to and relates with what I was saying about listening. Because if you're in a relationship with someone or you're trying to establish a relationship with someone and it's clear from the beginning they can't actually listen, what do you think is going to happen when there's an important conversation? What do you think is going to happen if there's actual conflict? Well, I can tell you what's going to happen is that confused, muddled mess of things that have no basis in real external world. And I can tell you that's going to be a very miserable, unhappy, draining, tiring experience. And that applies whether we're trying to do a business thing or whether we're in a work professional setting or whether we're a musician in a creative thing. Like, I think music's actually a good illustration of it, where if you're a musician in a band, you have to be very aware of context and how everything fits and harmonizes together. And if you're just off in your own world doing your own thing, you suck. You're not good. Is the outcome of that? It's objectively you suck. Like everyone's going to be like, okay, you're out of here. And that's not their opinion. That doesn't mean they're mean. It doesn't mean they're harsh. It doesn't mean they're whatever. It just means based on this established common sense, objective, real world things of music, that's just not it. But the thing is, that mechanic transfers over to so many other aspects of human life. And people act like it's all just a big mystery and we can never understand it and it's so complicated and we need to understand the oneness and the suchness, all this mental masturbation when it really comes down to these simple things. And if you actually listen and hear everything I'm saying in this live stream and go read your actual legitimate teachings from real teachers and real traditions, they're saying the same shit because it's the human experience. And long story short, most people don't actually have empathy. They don't actually have compassion because they can't actually listen. Most people are not good at anything, myself included. Most people are just kind of fumbling through life, which is why if you go online and you read memes, people are like, no one knows what they're doing. Everyone's just figuring it out. Those memes will blow up. Why? Well, because those people don't know what they're doing. They're very confused. And I can tell you that in instances where, in a dating context, let's say, to go back to that context, and I just do that because it's an easy, very tangible way to illustrate these things. I could use other things. I could talk about it in spiritual terms or whatever else, but I think this is a little more clear and easily relatable. I can tell you that how I started to really understand this is I would try a dozen different things to try and connect and develop some actual connection with a person. Maybe I thought there was potential, or I thought they had some good qualities, so I, really gave it the effort, right? And if I would bring up, hey, I feel like the listening isn't really here, etc. Obviously, I said it differently, and there was more to it, but in essence, that's what it came down to. And then when I hear their recounting of events or recounting of conversations or things of that nature, and then I realized that more often than not, those things didn't actually occur in the real world. The words weren't actually said. Um, and their distortion of events is just like so far removed from anything that you end up being in this position where you're like, there's nothing to respond to. It's just fallacy and fallacy and imagination all wound up together, and you're just like, okay, huh. So then it's like, but I'm the asshole in that situation because I say I don't feel like listening, and then their recount of everything is so far removed from everything, which just confirms that they're not listening because I can tell you what they didn't say ever in those situations was, "Oh, how so? Really? Tell me more." Okay. How was I not listening, or what did I miss, or what happened? Can you tell me more? Can I understand? That never happened, which to me seems like a very simple thing, because if I'm talking to someone, whether it's a friend or a family member, or even I don't know, some random person I'm talking to in the grocery store, and I don't understand something, I'll just say, "Oh, what do you mean? Oh, what? Hold on." Or if they say something and I'm like, "Well, I think I understand what I might what mean by that, but I don't understand probably how they mean that." So I'll say, "Oh, well, tell me more," or "How did you get there?" or "What does that mean?" or "What does that look like?" or some engaging following questions so then they can explain it. "Oh, okay, now I get what you mean. Okay." And then I can say, "Oh, well, that was what I thought you meant," or "That was not what I thought you meant at all. Okay, this is a new thing. I think I thought that was just part of being human, but clearly it's not." Um, and clearly, yeah. So, anyways, that's pretty much it. I've looped around this many times, and when I say it's wildly hilarious to me, I really mean that. I do. I'm not laughing about it on camera, but off camera, I do really laugh about this stuff. Like some conversations I have with people, I do genuinely chuckle about it, and it just kind of like it's funny. It's really entertaining. It's just like, man, life or God or the universe definitely has a sense of humor because sometimes I just feel like I'm getting trolled. It's like it's incredible. Uh, but ultimately, in some situations, there's no other option left. Like for example, this is I'll just tell everyone this is how mean and harsh and how much of an asshole I am and how wounded and all this shadow work I need to do. Where there be someone, like I said before, maybe I was interested in them, maybe they had some good qualities, maybe I saw potential, right? So if I'm like, okay, they're not really hearing me, but maybe let me try it a different way. Let me step more into their world. Let me try to say it more in a way that fits with their mode of processing. Let me connect with and become more familiar with their commonalities or their interests, trying to basically connect. That all fails. Okay, let me just try music. Okay, that fails. I don't know, food. Yeah, that fails. Art, that fails. News stories. Oh yeah, that fails. Music, yeah, that fails. There's or movies or something. Just trying all these different ways of trying to find some way of actually listening or some way of actually communicating and actually doing a lot of legwork to try and step into their worldview with the hopes that maybe they'll feel more comfortable or maybe they'll feel more established and it'll build some rapport or chemistry. And then that can maybe open the door to actual listening. Yeah, never did. And I can tell you in every single instance, all the labor, mental and emotional labor that I was putting in was not even noticed and realized, which if they can't listen, then yeah, obviously. Um, but then in every single thing, I'm the asshole. I'm mean. I'm whatever, fill in the blank. I'm wounded, traumatized, inner child, shadow work, psychological weaponization thing. And, after experiencing that, a handful of times, I actually did sit down and really map this stuff out. And I do actually have a map for these things. I've clearly established frameworks for why people operate in these ways and the predictable ways in which they respond. I haven't shared them publicly, and I probably won't because I think it could be used for harm. Because these people again are very easy to manipulate. Um, And there are certain douchey people in the world who would prey on that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll put it out in a book at a later date, because I've got, I don't know, 100, 200 pages about a lot of these different mechanisms um, written. But anyways, my point is that a dozen things I tried, maybe a bunch of hours to actually try and connect and communicate, and then was rejected at every turn. And then I politely, calmly mention those facts or mention that there's listening. And then again, I'm more the bad guy, I'm an asshole. And then that led me to, I think these people are actually just mentally not doing too well. Um, and again, before people want to straw man like everything I'm not saying this is every experience. In other words, for the low IQ listeners, that's not every experience. I'm referring to a specific set of experiences. And most of the experiences I've had have been great and positive. I'm referring to a specific set of experiences and examples because I'm illustrating and explaining certain points. And that's why I'm doing it. Because if you try to explain points and concepts, you usually would like to use examples that line up with those things, because that's logic, I think. That's kind of how language works, I think. But yeah, people like to straw man. Where if you say one thing, oh, you think that about everyone. No, that's not what I said. That's not what I implied. And I guess thanks for telling me that your IQ was really low or your thought process is really muddled, because you clearly, if you assume that everyone just thinks in this way, then it means either or. It's like, well, no, life is not exactly like that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it's just funny. Anyways, yeah, that's everything on my outline. Pretty minimal chat engagement on this one. Maybe it's just the time here or whatever in the subject matter. But to go back to what I was saying on the extreme, full-blown mental illness, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder, fucking inability to have empathy or engage with other people, it comes back to this stuff. And if you don't believe me, that's fine. Go interact with the world, and you'll see it pretty quickly. Have opinions or views that are not completely conformist, you'll see it very quickly. Try to engage in any type of meaningful thing, and you'll see it very quickly. And this is also why a major determining factor why most people don't do anything with their lives, because they can't listen. I mean, point blank. That's pretty much comes down to that. Because if you can't listen, you also can't really learn. If you're not open to the external world, then you can't actually learn and develop. Because being good at anything means that you have to become aware of how not good you are at the thing, which means you have to fail a lot, which means you have to have feedback a lot, which means you have to have some external hierarchy and people of authority. All of these things are checks and balances for the human animal, and we need them. And they can be very beneficial for us. And when we become isolated from them, it doesn't really go too well in any way, shape, or form. So, anyways, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully it's been elucidating, and it's certainly building upon the things that I shared in previous live streams, because there is a thread, there is a thing of commonality, and I think it is actually quite useful and beneficial things for people to engage with. But that's just my opinion, right? But again, anytime someone just wants to retreat back to subjectivity and relativity as their like exclusive and only mode of interaction, what does that imply based on the definitions that I said before? Anyways, yeah, if there's no doesn't seem to be any. Oh yeah, Bill Holmes. At least you're a very aversion. Blah blah blah. Uh oh, that is up. Do you have any videos about stress and how it can lead to autoimmune issues? I mean, I guess the better question is, if you know stress can lead to autoimmune issues, what else do you need to know? Do you know what I mean? Like if I know putting my hand on a hot stove or at a fire burns my hand, I don't really need anything to know anything more than just don't do that or use caution. So if stress can lead to autoimmune issues, absolutely. Uh, I don't know what more you need to know other than that, aside from how to lower the stress. Do you know what I mean? So I think the better question would be how to lower stress, right? In which case, yeah, I have a lot of videos about that. There's, herbs you can take, reishi, gynostemma, schizandra can be very useful. Neuroptimal neurofeedback can be very useful to lower the stress in the nervous system. Um, and yeah, those herbs can be very helpful, especially the gynostemma and reishi. Gynostemma probably one of the most can help rewire the fight or flight response and the HPH axis. Um, what if you don't feel stressed, but have been told that could be a reason? The thing is, even if you don't, I mean, I don't know you, so I can't say anything specifically, but I can say that there are a lot of people that live in a constant state of stress and have no idea because they're normalized to it. So just because people have uh, stress and they don't feel it, that doesn't mean they're not stressed. That just means they don't feel it. Because any chronic pain eventually, within reason, your body will eventually numb it out. And the thing is, chronic stress over a long enough period of time is not chronic stress. It's just normal. So uh, that's a very well established principle and mechanic. And I can tell you from personal experience that as someone who lived in a very stressful state for many years, and I was like, what do you mean? I'm not stressed. And then I actually became not stressed. And then I was like, holy shit, I was very stressed. um, so yeah. I mean, at the same time, I don't know where you got that information. I don't know who gave it to you, what their authority is, and why they said it. So I'm kind of just spitballing, just guessing. But yeah, especially if it's an autoimmune thing. If it's autoimmune, something like that, turkey tail and reishi is very beneficial. The things I did to not be stressed are the things that I have made, I guess, 900 videos about at this point. Those products are very useful. Neurooptimal neurofeedback is very useful, and pretty much all the various mindset psychology related stuff that I've made over the years is about shifting out of a stressful, conflict oriented mindset. Because if someone's stressed, usually their mindset is just stuck in conflict, and that's usually their default mode of relation is just conflict. And because stress and conflict is the same thing, fight or flight, that's conflict. So if we're in a fight or flight state, that means we're experiencing some sort of conflict, whether it's real in the world or imagined or some emotional thing or possibly something that happened in the past that we're still just reacting to. So, yeah, that is one of the major overarching reasons why I make videos such as this one is to bring awareness to stressful mindsets and modes of operation and maybe suggest ways of not doing that. Because being able to actually listen and have attention will take a person out of stress. Um, that's just pretty much it. So yeah, those supplements are good. Neurooptimal neurofeedback is good. Obviously, the basics, just exercising and getting diet in a way that keeps your blood sugar even. Um, those are all great things to do. But um, like I said, I'm kind of just spitballing and flying blind because I don't know you and I don't have any deeper information for what you're saying. But happy to answer any of those questions, and they're definitely good questions. Yeah, I would say at a certain point, it's up to you, my friend. No one's gonna do it for you. No one's gonna fix it for you. No one's gonna. There's no magical pill. There's no golden elixir. It's really just comes down to yourself and the choices that you want to make, and you have to, I guess, empower yourself to actually make those choices and first take the responsibility and accountability for those things. Otherwise, you'll still be in a disempowered state because empowerment and responsibility and accountability kind of go together. Because if you're disempowered, then obviously you don't have any responsibility or accountability because it's not your fault. Versus if you take responsibility and accountability, now you have power because now you've just brought things within your mode of control or operation, which means you have influence over them, which is power. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if you've been doing daily meditation and you're still stressed, then I probably really wouldn't recommend it, to be honest, because it's not actually meditation at all. Uh, like, I mean, it can be useful, but the thing is that if people are already really stressed and or in negative states, then they do meditation, and sometimes they think they feel better, but they're just numb. It's not that they've changed or released or fixed anything; they just have become numb. Or become disassociated in some way. And then they've interpreted that as progress when it's not progress. Disassociation is not progress. I'm not saying that's you. I don't know you. I don't know your situation. Again, I'm just speaking in general terms. And if people are already stressed, I'm not a fan of put some mindfulness on it, do some meditation. Not at all. I think that's not the best thing for people to be doing. I think it can just make things worse more often than not. And I've seen it myself many, 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 many times. And there's very well established stories of people that who are mentally unwell and get into meditation, and it ends very poorly. Some people commit suicide on the extreme. So, yeah, I wouldn't really recommend doing that. It's bigger fish to fry and better usage of time and energy. So, yeah. But yeah, keep the questions rolling if if people are interested. I'll be happy to answer the questions because that's always what happens. I'm always like, all right, I'm out of here, guys. That's everything, and then the questions roll in a bit, which is cool. I'm like, can you just bring them in earlier, please? I guess maybe there's something with YouTube where maybe it doesn't push out that I'm live unless I've been live for a while or something. I'm not exactly sure. Um, so yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, don't worry about it at all, man. I'm just glad people tune in. I know the time zones are weird for sure, but I'll hang out for another minute and then probably be out of here because I think there was other stuff I was supposed to do today, but I just had certain things on my outline that I wanted to come across. And I definitely recommend going back and rewatching the live stream because there's good stuff in it. And again, when I say it is, what did I say? When I say it's wild, some of the stuff is wildly hilarious to me. It really is. Like, it's wildly hilarious, but at the same time, I think if you're a person and you're a functional adult, then you definitely should have a set of principles that you strive for and live by. And even if people straw man and ad hominem you and give you a bunch of malarkey, just stick by them and you laugh. Because I think there's again, I think these are reasons why people don't do anything. For example, all the 900 or so videos I've made over the years, yeah, anyways. But yeah, I'm not gonna go on that. I've already said it all. I'm not gonna just repeat it. Anyways, yeah, thanks for the questions, Sean, I guess. Shawnee. I can't really tell from the username, but yeah. Happy to answer any questions and appreciate people tuning in. I appreciate you tuning in. I know in New Zealand it's like I don't even know what day it is. You guys are so far ahead. But yeah, if there's not any other questions, then I'll probably leave soon. Yeah. Yeah, 1:06 p.m. on Tuesday. It's like 5 p.m. on Monday right now where I'm at. So quite a bit different. Anyways, I guess I'll go since there's no other questions and such. Definitely go back and rewatch the live stream. Some good stuff in there. Hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it's been useful. Thanks again for everyone that tuned in and watched. And hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are on the planet. And I will see you again on the next one.